Hello, I'm Anne Bartlett, Blue Badge Tour Guide. I'm in the Cotswolds near Stow-on-the-Wold. I'm walking part of the Monarch's Way, which is a long distance footpath, tracking the escape route of King Charles II after his defeat at the Battle of Worcester in 1651. I'm looking forward to getting to Stow. It's an amazing town. It's been shaped by its landscape. Stow means meeting place, Wold means high ground. In fact, Stow is 800 feet above sea level. So it's the highest town in the Cotswolds. 8 roads converge on Stow, but none of them actually pass through the marketplace. So it was a great centre for trade as far back as prehistoric times, the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. In fact, there's earthworks from the Iron Age, so it was quite important at that time. And it's been the centre of trade all the way through history. I'm looking forward to getting to Stow. It's a great place for shopping. There's lovely cafes, pubs and restaurants there. It's built around a square, so the layout is very different from other Cotswold towns and villages. So it's cosy, it's convenient, and there's a lovely sense of community there. So I'm really looking forward to showing you Stow and taking you around, explaining just how Stow grew over the centuries to what it is today. The walk has brought me to Well Lane at the bottom of Digbeth Street, round the corner from the Porch House. The Porch House opposite must be the oldest building in Stow. Built in 947 AD, it's recorded as the oldest pub in England. Although it has a 17th century facade and a porch dated 1615, the oak beams inside have been carbon dated, which show that the origins go back to 947 AD. In the dining room there is a 16th century fireplace with symbols carved into the stone to prevent witches coming down the chimney. During renovation work, a very old shoe was found hidden up the chimney, another way of warding off witches and evil spirits. This shows how very superstitious people were centuries ago. Before I take you into the centre of Stow, I'm going to give you a glimpse of some of the shops off the main market square, down side streets, along alleys and in courtyards. This is one of my favourite go-to places for Christmas shopping, where I can find something that little bit special. This is the main access road into Stow-on-the-Wold, always beautifully decorated with summer bedding plants. As you turn off the Fossway, you'll see this Gothic-style drinking fountain, built in 1894, which replaced a horse pool that provided water for the many animals driven to and from the markets. I love the different sized troughs, the large ones for animals, medium-sized for humans, and the small ones at the bottom for the dogs. As you continue on, the square opens up ahead and is surrounded by impressive 2- and 3-storey, mellow, honey-coloured Cotswold stone buildings. In the centre is St Edward's Hall, which on first glance looks like a church, but the church is to the right, and you can just see the top of the tower above the roofs of the shops. St Edward's Hall was built onto the square in the 19th century, so before that the whole of the central area was used as a weekly market. In the 15th century, Stow was granted permission to hold 2 annual fairs, and then up to 20,000 sheep were usually sold at each fair in the Middle Ages. The wool from the Cotswold sheep was in high demand on the continent, and the fleeces fetched a very high price. This gap between the buildings is one of a number of turs or alleys. Legend has it that sheep were driven to and from the market along these turs so they could be counted. Just think of all the sheep being herded into the square from these turs. And don't forget, the buildings in the middle weren't there then. The square was also used to sell other items such as food and essential supplies. Look out for the letterbox on the wall of the Talbot Hotel. It's marked for corn returns. This building was once the corn exchange, where farmers would have placed their sample packets of grain so the quality of what they were selling could be assessed. The market cross was erected in the early 15th century to serve as a reminder to the market traders to deal honestly. It's worthy of a close inspection because the cross has a beautifully carved gable top, which is a recent addition and recalls the early history of the town. With a large influx of strangers for the medieval markets and fairs, crime was prevalent. Fights were frequent and pickpocketing and drunkenness was common. It must be remembered that the police force had not been created, so it would have been very hectic, noisy and chaotic. In the square were stocks where villains, drunks and other disreputable people were restrained. The stocks can still be seen and are situated on the green. These are the most recent ones, and they date back a few hundred years. They're looking very worn now because they are still well used today. For fun rather than punishment, I hasten to add. Imagine being mocked and having rotten vegetables, eggs, and anything else that's lying around thrown at you. It would have been a very humiliating experience. St. Edward's Hall in the centre of the square, complete with a magnificent statue of St. Edward in a niche above the front door, was built in 1877 for approximately £4,000. The money came from savings made by local people in the Provident Bank, which had offices in the town. When the Post Office Savings Bank was set up, the Provident Bank transferred its business. However, a lot of savings were left unclaimed. The money was invested while the claimants were sought. Interest accrued, and after 10 years it was decided to use the unclaimed money to build a hall for the community. House fires were always a problem, and a method to summon the local firefighters was needed. Ringing the church bells was considered, but the vicar imposed too many restrictions. In 1892, a fire bell was donated to the town to summon the volunteer fire brigade. It was difficult to know where to place it for convenience, so it was decided to build a turret and mount the bell on St. Edward's Hall roof, and this was added at a much later date, hence its unusual appearance. Another thing to look out for are the grooves in the stonework around the doorway of the hall, which were from ropes rubbed against the door frames by the horses that were tied there. The town, with no sewerage system and very busy weekly markets, would have been a very unsavoury place, with plenty of dung heaps around the square. Notice the foot scrapers beside the hall door. They are no longer necessary, but they serve as a reminder of the very insanitary conditions of the 18th and 19th century. Stow was also a town without water. The supply had to be fetched from wells on the outskirts of the town. Women and children would be seen with yokes slung across their shoulders, carrying water home in buckets, while horses pulled barrels of water into the streets, where the wealthier people paid for it by the bucket. As Stow was at the intersection of a number of roads, there were quite a few coaching inns. There was the Red Lion, now called the Old Stocks, and there was the White Hart Inn, now called the Stag at Stow. Notice the archway through the courtyard at the back. The cobbled entrance was where horses and carriages passed through to the stables. Similarly with the King's Arms Hotel, another coaching inn. This is where King Charles I is supposed to have stayed for a night during the English Civil War before the Battle of Naseby. Again, there was a carriage entrance to what would have been the stable yard at the back. The King's Arms had a reputation for being one of the best inns between London and Worcester. Stow became involved in the Civil War because King Charles I ordered all his forces from the western marches to meet him at Oxford. He hoped that with the help from France and Ireland, victory would finally be his. The parliamentarians unfortunately gained information about his plans, and troops were sent to converge on the royalists to prevent them from joining up with the king at Oxford. On the 21st of March, 1646, the battle took place just outside Donnington, although its exact location is still unknown. The king's troops, led by Lord Astley, moved into battle array on a ridge of high ground. The strong royalist position paid off in the early stages of the fighting, with the parliamentarians struggling to make progress as they advanced uphill. However, the strength of the parliamentarian army soon had the royalist troops in retreat, and after desperate fighting they withdrew into the town, where more fighting continued. According to legend, it was said that Digbeth Street ran red with royalist blood from the dreadful slaughter that took place in the square. 1,600 captured royalist troops were imprisoned in St Edward's Church overnight, as it was the strongest and most secure building in Stow, as well as being large enough to accommodate that number of men. The very next day they were marched to Gloucester for trial. Soon after the Battle of Stow, King Charles I surrendered. The conflict had lasted 6 years and ended with the king's execution on the 30th of January 1649. The Battle of Worcester, which I mentioned during my walk along the Monarch's Way, took place on the 3rd of September 1651. Charles II was attempting to regain the throne that had been lost when his father Charles I was executed. But his forces were no match for Oliver Cromwell's parliamentarian New Model Army. St Edward's Church at Stow is a Grade 1 listed building. The 15th century tower is 88 feet high and is a landmark from miles away. This is the West End, and all the way round you'll notice a mixture of architectural styles because of additions and renovations over several centuries. Continue around to the north side and you'll find the most photographed door in the region, known as the Yew Tree Door. Is this the inspiration for J.R.R. Tolkien's Doors of Durin, the entrance to Moria made by dwarves and elves in The Lord of the Rings? A lot of people think so and come here specially to admire and photograph it. I hope that you've enjoyed your virtual tour of Stow-on-the-Wold and that you've been inspired to come and visit and enjoy the other nearby towns and villages in the Cotswolds. I'm Anne Bartlett, Blue Badge Tour Guide, and my website is www.touringexplore.com.